You live in a small town, and the legend of King Arthur, while widely known, is just a legend, until Excalibur is found lodged in a nearby stone. The man who pulls it out will become king, and you pull it out. But there are two problems. America isn't a monarchy, and you're a woman. The sword was found lodged at the bottom of a quarry, to much fanfare of world news. The magnificent long sword's golden hilt and beginnings of the blade were above the coarse stone, free of any signs of age. The first few characters of the name were visible extending down, penetrating into the rock after the sea. What everyone knew was quickly confirmed by experts in the field. This was the legendary sword Excalibur. The newly found World Heritage Site became a huge commercial boom to the local community. Thousands upon thousands of tourists flocked to see the sword, and with them, shops, restaurants, rides, and a museum sprouted up to take advantage. Of course, they had all tried to lift it. The initial workmen who had made the discovery, the experts, the first few to visit, and the thousands of tourists paying for the privilege. None had succeeded. Jessie had seen the drama unfolding on TV, in the papers, online. She had been told endless times by her school friends and even had to listen to her parents excitedly discussing it most nights at the dinner table. Who would lift the sword? What would it mean? Did you know that there's a jackpot prize now? Jessie blamed the constant deluge of information for the fact that the sword had begun to dominate her dreams. Most nights she would see the sword dimly lit by the moon in a foggy marsh, the sound of footsteps echoing in the puddled water. It would be beckoning her, calling with pulses that increased in their urgency. She would climb the wet, moss-covered rock and reach for the sword, and then wake up, heart pounding. So it was with some relief her parents informed her that the three of them would be having a family outing to see the sword. Maybe her parents would finally have enough, and she would be able to dismiss it from her dreams. The day came, and it was long. The drive to get there, the queues, the shopping, the rides. It was so boring, Jessie couldn't help but feel tired and bored. She wanted to go home. Finally, they entered the huge cavernous theater that held the stone. At the top, an opening was left that allowed sunlight to strike the rock and make the sword sparkle and glow. If it wasn't cloudy at least, like today. Huge tapestries depicting scenes from medieval times were draped around the circular room, highlighted in places by blazing torches hung around them. For those attempting to lift the stone, costumed workers would bow as they approached and take photos as they attempted the impossible. The queue split in two ways, those paying the extortionate fee to take part, and those who wanted to pay less and walk around the gallery that encircled the room above the tapestries. It was an incredibly well-oiled money-making machine. Jessie had assumed her family would be taking the latter route, but as her father and mother began to walk that way, her father thrust a different ticket into her hands. "This was expensive enough that I fully expect you to come back with that bloody sword," he said, smiling. Before she could protest, they were gone, and she was left, being pushed forward into the main line. As she neared the rock, not yet at the front of the line, the crowd hushed suddenly. Excited whispers and eventually cheers began to sound. Had someone lifted the sword? She peered around the people ahead to see that the sword had begun to glow, and a deep, low, vibrating sound had begun to emanate from the stone. The crowd loved it, assuming, like Jessie, that this was all part of the show. Another way to overexcite people to part more easily with their money. The man in front of Jessie walked up to take his turn, and Jessie stepped into the circular array of stones surrounding the main rock. She was struck by the sudden vision from her dreams, the cold, wet, foggy marsh with the sword. The pulsing was so strong from the sword in her vision that her head hurt. She shook her head and cleared her thoughts, opening her eyes and returning to the moment. People were cheering loudly as the man desperately tried to lift the sword, the sound from the rock becoming louder and the sword glowing even brighter. The costumed workers were no longer helping to take photos or play the part of their medieval roles, but were talking into radios and signaling someone high up in the galleries. She spotted her dad up there, smiling wide while looking into his camera, her mother checking to make sure he was capturing everything. They were loving this, at least. The man eventually finished, obviously pleased that he had elicited such a reaction from the sword. He, descending down from the high rock, high-fived one of the workers. The worker looked worried and reached for a microphone at his waist. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am very sorry to inform you that after this young lady here attempts to pull the sword from the stone, the attraction will be closed for safety checks. Those remaining in the line will have their tickets refunded or replaced." A man in a suit joined the costume worker, whispering into his ear and eyeing the young man standing behind Jessie, pointing to him. He was a strapping lad, 6 foot plus, with long blonde hair and bright blue eyes. He had an intent look in his eyes, staring directly at the sword. If anyone would suit the sword, it would be him, Jessie thought. The worker motioned Jessie forward into the area, dimly lit from the cloud-covered hole high above. And as she did, a burst of light suddenly poured down on them, so bright and intense that she had to blink her eyes to adjust. When she was able to open them, what she saw astounded her. Glowing bright gold in the rock were etched emblems and signs. Atop the stone, the letters EXC emitted light that danced and shone down to her. The rumbling low vibration increased, and somehow, without even realizing it, she had begun to move up to the rock, or rather, be pulled up. From deep inside her, something had awoken, and was willing her to take the sword and hold it aloft. And she had never desired anything as forcefully as this. It took her a moment to realize that one of the workers was trying in vain to hold her back, and had been joined by two other workers. Both of them were much bigger than Jessie, much stronger, but somehow she was able to keep moving forward, not even feeling their touch or desperate attempts at restraining her. She reached the top of the stone, extended her hand, and grabbed the hilt of the sword. A shockwave burst from the stone, throwing the workers, the suited man, and everyone close by off their feet. The beam of light concentrated its focus into a beam that hit the sword as Jessie began to pull. A strength she had never known began to envelope her as she heaved. The sword didn't move, and as she concentrated all of her strength, ready for a final heave, she heard a whispered, metallic, deep and slow rumble in her mind, the sword glowing in unison with the words, "Jessie Harbinger, are thee truly worthy?" Images flashed before her eyes that she couldn't control. As if something was searching through her memories, it lingered on the painful ones, considered the moments she had been scared or cornered, times when she'd lost, times when she'd won. There seemed to be images that she didn't even remember being there, and it was on those that the searching stopped. "She will do," a chorus of deep, old voices echoed. With a mighty crack, the rock burst and splintered as Jessie heaved the sword from the stone and held it aloft. As she did, her arm was encased in a golden glow, spreading to the rest of her body. Silver armor rimmed with gold began to appear where it had been, until her entire body was covered. "Jessie, you are not safe here," the same metallic voice said in her head. Jessie was reeling, her head swimming with power and confusion. She couldn't answer. "Jessie, we must hurry. Someone is waiting to see you," it said. "Excalibur, bring her to me. There is no time." Another voice, old and ancient, creaking like an old boat. A bolt of lightning exploded into the room from the hole in the roof above, directly striking the sword and blinding all those around. When the flash faded, Jessie and the sword were gone.